Today let's talk about data sources and how to connect to a database. Right now I'm going to connect to Java. I'm just going to create a traditional Java application. We're going to create a command line app and we're going to call it data sources. And in this data sources application, I'm going to create, let's call it data source DB as a class where we're going to extract the database. We're going to use a database as a data source. So what I would like to do for this project is use a MySQL connection. And MySQL, if you are on a Mac, you can run brew install MySQL. If you're on any other connection, let's assume that you have already a database set up and that your server is running, and so you have in this case, for this example, I'm going to be using the MySQL, let's go in here, MySQL sample database. And if we Google MySQL sample database, you can download the MySQL samples database, where you can then go into the installation part of it, go into the employees database on GitHub. So once you clone it, you can do something like git clone and clone the database. And once you clone that database, you can test DB, and if you look at the README, which is right here, it'll tell you that essentially you only run MySQL employees, and once you run it, then you have a database called employees. When you call show database, you have the database called employees. So you can say use employees, and that you can use a command show tables to see what you have there. And if I'm gonna assume that you already have some sort of knowledge about MySQL, so I'm gonna do something like let's describe employees, and let's assume that I'm gonna do select star from employees limit 10. We're gonna get the first 10 records, so now I can actually look for even you can go where first name equals Georgie, and we are finding all the Georgies with different hiring dates. Let's even try to, there's a lot of the same people, but let's assume like Facello, and last name equals Facello. So we have the same record for the same person, or the same person that is named the same, but they have different birth dates. So this name is quite popular, and a different hire date. Whatever. The thing is that we have a connectivity with the database, and in this case I am just using MySQL. And assuming that you have a database, I would like to talk about how to get the database connected. So the typical example that I have here, it's something extremely simple, and let's just even copy and paste it, because I am going to put the source code available in this video. So we can do something like public void, public static void. So just for this example, we don't have to instantiate a class, and db test, we're going to call that, and we're going to create our classes. Again, a usual reminder on IntelliJ is that when you have these elements in red is that there's a problem. Typically a good problem or a good alternative to autocorrecting the problems is you press the Alt key and then enter. You're gonna get this menu that it's suggesting what to do with it, so you can import the class. So I'm gonna import connection, import driver manager, import result set, import statement, import SQL exception, and then everything is gone. So at this point, when I imported IntelliJ, so many packages that there were from driver managers, result set, statement, etc. IntelliJ decided that rather than having 20 import Java SQL, resort set Java SQL, driver manager Java SQL statement, it decided that it would import basically everything and make it all of it available. Cool. And we're gonna go line by line about this code, but one of the first things that we gotta understand is that the Java SQL packages, so if we go into Java MySQL connection, for example, and we go into the API, we're gonna realize that essentially everything that we are referencing here is an interface, except for this one. This is an actual class, but everything else is an interface. Basically, we are grabbing the very general class as opposed to the particular class. Now, how are we going to get the particular classes? Through the driver manager. The driver manager, and this is where we gotta look into some of the basic concepts. A driver is a component that enables the Java application to interact with the database. That's basically the software piece that is going to allow us to do such connection. The connection is just the session. As we open up the connection, we have a session with a specific database. A statement is the object used for executing SQL, and you're going to get results via that. And the result that you get is going to be called the result set, which mimics a table. Just very much like we saw it here, we are going to mimic that via a result set. So that's how we are going to extract data from a database. Okay. We know that we're going to connect to my SQL database, and if I was going to run this code today, so if I do public static void main and we call string args and run data source db dot db test and executed that, we are going to get a first exception. And the exception is going to be that we do not have the suitable driver found. How do we get the driver for MySQL? Well, the driver manager is the one that is in charge of looking around and interpreting the URL and understanding how we're going to connect to the database and give us a proper driver that mimics all these classes. So how are we going to get it? Well, the very simplest way in IntelliJ would be to go to the preferences part of the product. The simplest way would be to go into the project file, and we go to project structure, and then in modules or libraries, we go into plus. Once we go into libraries, then we go into plus from Maven, and we do com.mysql, and then we hit search. So we try to find the MySQL dash connector, and you can try to find, I'm gonna go for MySQL, this one. Let's go for MySQL connector Java, and we're gonna go for the highest version, this guy. And once I install it and hit apply, now I can rerun it. And now my connection is going to complain about the time zone. So what I'm going to do is, in this case, I'm just going to copy and paste the error. There is a way to configure the database engine and do it like and try to find what to do. But in this case, and use and server time code. This is the one. So put that and server time code UTC. And now I am connected, and it's printing the values. Okay, so it connected, but let's go little by little into the database things. If we go into, and let's just start removing code from this part for a second. because what I want to do is understand get class get name. So we're gonna get what is the actual name of the class, even though that we're holding it by an interface. I want to reiterate that now this guy is an actual connection implementation. They call it connection EMPL as connection implementation because this is an interface that has this from this connection. So if we want to reverse engineer a little bit of what the jar connects, it has com.mysql.cj, and then we go into JDBC, and then we have this class connection implementation. And the beauty of IntelliJ is that it reverse engineers things, but you can see that it implements JDBC connection, and JDBC connection, if we go through this, it's using public interface JDBC connection from the same package that implements the connection from java.sql package. So technically it qualifies as a connection. So let's start breaking down what this entire code means. So the first line is the URL, and let's just hide the project. So let's look into the URL. It has the JDBC as a protocol, then saying that it's the database MySQL, where we're storing it as a local host, port 3306, database employees, the user and password, and other arguments for the connection. Then we ask the driver manager, which is the way that Java automatically gets the connections based on parsing this URL. It builds a connection, the proper connection from the driver, so we don't have to worry about how to instantiate it like with MySQL or anything like that in particular. The driver manager gets that connection automatically. Then we get a result set that we're gonna actually, we can even make it if we want to, because it's in this. Results set. Then we create the statement where we're going to execute the SQL command. And then we tell it execute query, where we put just our traditional SQL command, and then we get a result set. And while the result set is not null, that means that we actually got something. And we have values. While the result set has values, we're going to start printing the string that is on the first column. So if we did limit 10, if we did the same command here on the database, we're gonna get a column called first name, and we're gonna get the first 10 results. This is column number 1. We can also do it by first name, by the label of the column, and then we would be getting it by the same by how it is labeled, because we're getting first name. Now if I named it something else like first name 1, but we're requesting first name, the label is not going to work. So we're gonna try to get a column that is not found. So it's really important that the columns, either you use them by the number as they appear on the result set, or you use the proper naming. And I'm not gonna go into SQL elegance of commands or anything like that, because this video is not really about that. Then the next thing is that I'd like to highlight is that, well, we're surrounding everything by a try catch, because this guy can throw an SQL exception. We know that this guy can throw an SQL exception, so we surround all of our query with an SQL exception and then handle it. The most important thing about here is the finally, because what we want to make sure is that if we have a connection that is open, we close it. And remember that the finally statement on a try catch is executed regardless if an exception was thrown or not. In other words, the finally block, it's always executed and it's always called regardless of there being a problem or not. Okay, so let's talk about how to prevent SQL injection. SQL injection is when people go in a form and they start putting SQL queries with the hope that a malformed SQL command can be executed in a database. And let's just go into the same example of the databases. So Danny makes $73,000. Danny is this guy. And Patricia, where is Patricia? And Patricia makes $53,000. So Danny is making 73, but he is in charge of updating the database, or he wants to update the record for Patricia, and he wants at the same time to inject his own raise without really being any record of him modifying his own user of the system. So he can go into the form where the salaries are going to be put, and instead of putting the employee ID of just Patricia, he is going to inject SQL of or emp underscore no equals his user ID, his employee ID. So if we had code like this and executed it, simple code where we are sending the code for updating salaries to $90,000, just a very traditional thing where Patricia now makes $90,000, and that's by concatenating the employee into the query. So we're gonna call update salary, set it to 90,000, where employee number equals blah and current date. That's all well and good, but if we went back and reset her salary, and now Patricia has a salary of $53,000, what would happen if let's say Danny used this query just by adding or employee number equals blah and runs it. Now Danny who was making $73,000, if we go and execute that select statement again, we will see that Danny now also updated his salary and also updated Patricia's salary to $90,000. So that's basically what an SQL injection is, that the parameters that you might be sending to the database, and this is just pretending to be what the form would receive, could be injected, causing a vulnerability into your database, a security vulnerability. So how do you go about preventing that? Well, fortunately it's a very simple change, and that is using a precompiled query that is called a prepare statement. And a prepare statement is nothing else other than using, rather than a statement, it's a prepared statement. So we are going to create that, and we are replacing this create statement with connection.prepared statement, and we call this command. We change our query to, instead of concatenating, we just put a question mark to the parameter that then later we're going to pass. And before we execute the statement, we just tell the statement to set the string to the variable. So in the case where we have this injection, so if I was, let's see, if I do it like this. Okay, so if now, because it's a prepare statement, if I just call it executes update, it's not gonna call. So when I was calling it with a command, it's actually executing this command, which has an error in the syntax, which is this question mark. Like if I go and run it, so this is a good thing because you don't have to remember. It says yours near blah blah blah. Yes, there's an error because this is not prepared using the prepare statement. But if I remove the command, and since I already created that prepare statement using that command and I pass the arguments, now it is going to throw another error. But the error is going to say data truncation, truncated incorrectly, double value, because it's trying to add much more than just the double that was supposed to go in the employee. So if I then go ahead and execute this, and let's just reset both the salary of Patricia and the salary of Danny. Yeah, so we have, both of them have $53,000. So if we now go and execute this with the proper prepare statement, now only, if we go and call both, only the one that has a proper number 998, 998, 90,000, and 963, 53,000. So we tried to perform a SQL injection with this and it didn't fly. And that's basically it with SQL connections. I hope this was useful, and the code will be down at where the link is. And if you can, and if you like this, subscribe to the channel, hit like, and I hope to hear more from you soon. Bye bye.